But yeah, without further ado, let's dive into our recap of episode 66 of Campaign 3, Aid of the Tempest. And as always, we're going to cut this recap out, host it separately. So if you're on just that recap video and you want to see our full discussion, you will be able to find it linked in the description below. So yeah, episode 66. We pick back up. What?
Sorry, man. I said let's do it and made it awkward.
I thought you were about to say you were doing first half, and I was gonna be like, oh gosh.
No, you're good.
So we pick back up with their crew having just teleported to Zephra, where they're immediately confronted by guards who are actually like pummeling them with wind, essentially, and members of Bell Cells are flying everywhere. But Orym is like, hey, friendlies here. Like, we're coming home. And it's at this point that the guards stand down. And one in particular, with long blonde hair, we find out to be Maeve, one of Will's sisters. So Orym tackles her in a big hug and then introduces everyone and asks her how everything is. She tells him that the Tempest is resting, but she's not doing too great, and that everyone has just been kind of scattered after the big fight at the Malleus Key. She does tell him that Lita, another sister, is back here as well safely, and she is standing guard over Keyleth. She also then quickly says that, your mom's doing great, my mom's doing great. And we basically get a quick family tree, an official one, from Orym about Will's family. So we know that Will had triplet siblings, of which Maeve and Lita are two of the three. The third one we don't meet here, but his name is Bernie, or her name, I guess we don't know. And Will was their younger brother. And then, of course, Derek was Will's father. Nell is Will's mother. And Alma is Orym's mother. So Orym says, hey, we need to go talk to the Tempest. So Maeve leads them to her. Inside, they see Lita, who, again, is a master of defense. And they then get escorted up to Keyleth's room, where they find her resting on a large bed, wounds all over her body, still festering, basically. Yeah. Orym kneels, and the rest of Bell Cells follow, and they greet Keyleth, and they find out that she's still in such a rough spot because her wounds are inflicted with that same poison that was used in the previous attack on Zephra that prevents resurrections. She tells them that she was only able to recover back then because of this remedy. Blue peridium flower, which is very rare, very hard to find. And she says, we sent out a group to go find more of this flower to help me get back, up to speed. But they haven't heard from them in a few days now. And we find out that this flower, I believe its leaves look like faces, and they only grow in like very rare places, typically places of strife. And specifically the Gray Valley is where this group was sent to, and is probably the safest amongst the places they're aware of that this flower grows. Orym then asks Keyleth, what happened? What's the last thing you remember? And Keyleth says that she saw someone important to her, someone she lost long ago. That was the last thing she saw this person, and that she is going to do everything in her power to destroy those who did this. Ludinus, Odahan, Liliana. And Orym at that point is like, hey, by the way, Liliana is Imogen's mom. And Keyleth is like, yeah, I had my suspicions. But Imogen actually says, she's here to help. And she actually telepathically communicates to Keyleth that, like, I'm here to help. I just want to fix this. And Keyleth is like, I just need to regain my strength, get to Vasselheim, speak with the other leaders there, but I can't in my current state. So I hate asking, but Orym, would you and your friends mind looking into the group that went missing to go look for the flowers? And Orym says, of course, like, let me and my friends prove ourselves to you. Like, we'll do it. And there's a little moment here as well where Orym and Keyleth are just speaking about how angry they are. And Keyleth says, I've been angry for 30 years, but she tells Orym, you have to learn how to use your anger. So help me use mine. And boom, they're all about it. Orym is like, yes, we'll do anything. So then Lita takes the party and is like, hey, we're going to get you anything you need for this journey. And Maeve can actually teleport you guys to the Gray Valley when you're ready to go. And then they have a brief conversation here where Lita tells them more about what happened at the excavation site after the bright white light, because she was there. She says that many people just vanished, but the fighting that took place afterwards was brutal. Some of the Raylora came down and they were fighting them, and the Ashari just did their best to collect their troops and retreat. Interestingly, Fern does an insight check here and does get a whisper from Matt. And after this, she asks Lita if she thinks there's any moles among the Ashari. But Lita just shakes her head and says she doesn't want to sow any distrust or paranoia. So another Ashari that's kind of been here the whole time is this, excuse me, this man named Thallo, who is kind of an expert in history. So they ask Thallo about the Grey Valley and learn that it's this place that was marred in the Great War of Gwasar hundreds of years ago, and that demonic essences and spirits still like scavenge the land. Because he's an expert, Ashton actually asks him about the Hishari, and Thallo tells him basically what we already knew, that they just kind of stole the Ashari name for credibility and got messed in with some things they shouldn't have and blew themselves up. But Ashton asks, hey, if you can learn any more about that, like I would really love to know. So then the crew goes and checks in with Orm's mom, Alma, and she is ecstatic to see everybody and meets everyone. And we find out she's one of the midwives of the town. And they bring out some of Orm's old baby stuff, including some of his toys and booties. And Chetney actually makes a small little wooden statue of Orm to give to Alma. And he, of course, engraves C-Pop Industries on the side. And the mom is, like, oh my gosh, this is such craftsmanship. And it's revealed that Orm's baby toys were also C-Pop items. And so everyone just freaks out that, like, Chetney actually is, not just all smoke. And there's a few jokes made about, Chetney potentially being Orm's dad. But they have their little meeting, and then the group heads off. And then they quickly go and see two people. Torth, who is like a local blacksmith, to get some leather working done for Orm and his armor getting patched up. And then a person named Fanny Z, who's like a seamstress. And Ashton goes to place an order for some new clothes. One befitting an anti-hero with like newfound purpose. So after that's all settled, they then head to Maeve to be teleported, and they are handed a backpack and said, like, you basically need to fill this backpack with the flour to have enough. Orm hugs his two sisters and they teleport, and that's where we go to break on the first half.
Yeah, great job, man. Well, coming back from the break, they step out of this portal into the Grey Valley to see, I think Laura describes it as like being in color on television with everything black and white. It is a desolate area. Even the leaves on the trees are this sort of pale, papery white color. The ground, I think Matt describes it as like this, like crunchy, dried moss. And the party can just barely see a mountaintop, sort of crowning the edge of the valley. And they know they're a ways from Zephra, and they immediately are wondering, okay, where exactly should we go? Where do we find this flower? Orm actually does have a couple of perception checks for, I think, like a 27 and a 30, naturally. And Matt's like, you are sure the blue flower is not here. Ladna is going to send Pate to look around and see if he can find it. But meanwhile, FCG is going to cast divination where, he's going to ask the Changebringer, hey, can you guide us? Can you let us know where to go? As he basically lets the coin out of the Changebringer, it's going to spin and fall in a western direction, sort of guiding them that, hey, what you seek is in the western direction. So they begin to head that way, and immediately Ashton is going to cast Pass Without a Trace on the party because, like I mentioned, it's a desolate place, but more importantly, they are seeing all sorts of creatures in the distance, notably some sort of like large dark beasts that are flying in the sky. and sort of circling the area. There is one point actually where two of these winged creatures are nearby and they fly off without seeing the party. And then after an hour, the Pass Without a Trace falls off, and the party is very much sort of stealthily looking through this area trying to find this flower. Notably, they do come across a body in sort of the brush of this area with a helmet that has been seemingly stabbed or slashed from behind. And Chetney picks up this helmet with the head sort of falling down and stows it away in their bag of holding. It's also around this time where, as they're walking around, they find this large clearing where it feels like the trees have sort of been blown back in like this 200 feet direction. And Orem actually wonders if this was like an arrival spot for some fiendish creature of some kind. Speaking of fiendish creature, I think there was something along the lines, I don't know if Chetney casted something, but I think they detected something fiendish about this place. I don't know if you remember, Will, but they just know there's bad stuff around, basically. So they continue on. They pass through this little marshland, and they've gone for a couple of hours at this point. And two things happen. One, Chetney decides he's going to scout ahead to see if he can track anything down, and begins to observe what appears to be this black smoke that seems to be coming out of the ground, this sort of light, wispy black smoke. Laudna confirms with Pate to see what Pate sees, and it seems like this smoke is sort of like coming out from the trees in some way. So they're thinking, okay, well, let's keep heading west, but let's also try to avoid... Black smoke does not seem good, so let's try to avoid that in the very least. They eventually make their way through this marshland into this sort of rocky clearing where Pate finds in this sort of crevasse of this rock a bundle of blue flowers, this blue flower that they've been looking for. And Chetney creeps up to try to get a closer look, and actually... there's a funny moment where they find out that Pate is actually colorblind, because they're like, go towards the blue flower. And he's like, well, I don't know what color that is. All that to say, Chetney climbs up, begins sort of harvesting out these flowers and stowing them into his bag. The party's about 60 feet away, and it's around this time that a couple things get noticed. One of the things being these two bodies of seemingly freshly deceased elves or half elves that sort of pop up in an undead way. And also this creature, this demonic creature with, Matt describes it as having like these two large encircling horns that go up about 2 feet above its head, that's just perched on a nearby rock. And Orem sees this with his passive perception, motions to Chetney, who then tries to pretend to like, oh, I'm coming back, guys. I don't see anything. Begins sort of to creep back. But combat does begin. And what we typically do in combat is we try to just cover the highlights of combat. Having said that, there were a lot of freaking cool moments in this combat.
Yes.
So you might even have to help me, Will, if I forget anything here. But this creature is a devourer demon. It's a classic 5e creature. And in its torso are these ribs that sort of open up to reveal a humanoid figure that is seemingly like trapped in the rib cage of this monster. And the party surmises that these are some of the Ashari group that has been sent before them to retrieve the blue flowers. So they begin to fight the two undead creatures. They begin to fight the devourer demon. The two creatures are going to jump on Chetney immediately and grapple him. And FCG casts something to make them like go 30 feet away, and they drag Chetney with them. And it's only a funny moment because there's like this, like, it's a marsh. So there's like this thick, like, there's a body of water nearby. And Chetney's like, FCG, what are you having them do? Like, stop. Speaking of the water, by the way, there's also going to be some wraiths that come out of the water as well to join the fray. Ashton is going to rage and attack the Devourer demon and does like 50 points of damage. Knocks it prone, does a lot of really cool stuff with that. And then Laudna at some point during the combat is going to basically like summon out of her breaking rib cage this demon wolf. I can't remember what she called it. But it's not the first time we've seen it. She's done it before in a previous episode. But that'll join the combat too. But absolutely the MVP of this combat is Fern, who casts Aura of Life. And it does two things. First of all, it halves all necrotic damage that the party takes within 30 feet. And then if someone starts the round at 0 hit points, meaning they've been knocked out in the previous round, they pop back up at 1 hit point. This is important because before she casts this, the Devourer demon does this attack that does like 30 points of damage to almost everyone, and it's necrotic damage. So this spell is like, this Aura of Life is like the MVP. It's constantly having damage. And in fact, she gets focused a couple of times and is just barely able to keep her concentration up before eventually one of these wraiths attack her and actually knock her out. And the Aura of Life unfortunately drops. Not to mention, I don't know if the Daylight spell ends either, but she had also casted this spell called Daylight, which created this 60-foot beam of light that, well, the undead and the demon didn't like that so much. Imogen is also going to cast, I think in one turn she casts Witch Bolt, and maybe even a second time she casts it, but she's eventually going to get the, how do you want to do this? The lightning is going to cascade up, hit the demon, Chetney on its back, I think, and the demon's basically going to explode and die. And the combat ends with... Orem has this cool moment of him, I think, like reaching down into like the shadowy corpse of the demon and sort of pulling out from it this mote of that humanoid that was trapped in its like rib cage and has this sort of like burial, like goodbye, like this sort of last tethering of touch. The party's unfortunately only gathered about a third of the flowers at this point, and so they continue on west to see what else awaits them. And that is where episode 66 ends of campaign 3 of Critical Role. So
boom, boom. Great job, man.
Thank you. Yeah. And don't forget, guys, that's just our recap. If you're watching just this recap video, we have our whole discussion linked in the description below as well.